I step outside, dressed and ready for an important city meeting, only to freeze in my tracks. My SUV is tilted forward, both front tires completely flat. Panic flashes through me, quickly giving way to something worse, suspicion. In the early morning haze, I scan the scene. There, in the driveway of my modest home on the edge of Sea View, sits a deflated mess where my trusty SUV once stood. The once powerful vehicle, my reliable ride to work, and a symbol of my status as the town sheriff, is now rendered immobile by what appears to be deliberate sabotage. As I race toward the vehicle, the familiar features of my uniform spill into focus. I had spent the previous night patrolling our quiet streets, ensuring that everything was in order. But never in my wildest nightmares would I have imagined that someone, emboldened by anonymity or mischief, would target me personally. My mind churns with questions. Who would do such a thing? And more importantly, why target my ride? I quickly recall the bitter history of conflict with one notorious neighbor, HOA Karen. For years, she's taken it upon herself to micromanage every aspect of our community. Whether it was complaining about the color of my mailbox or fining residents for minor infractions, she had a relentless hunger for control. And now, as I stand amidst the wreckage of my SUV tires, a dreadful possibility dawns on me. Could it be that she has struck again, this time crossing a line that touches not just personal property, but my very authority? My pulse races. The muffled sounds of early morning activity, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, fade as I focus solely on the scene before me. Determination mixes with an adrenaline-fueled anger. Tonight, I will find out who is behind this brazen act, and I will make sure they learn that in Cedarview, I'm not just any resident. I'm the town sheriff. And if you try to tamper with my property or disrupt my work, be prepared for consequences you won't soon forget. Cedarview is a tight-knit community where the streets are clean, the lawns immaculately manicured, and every aspect of life is governed by a strict set of rules enforced by the local homeowners association, HOA. The residents of Cedarview take pride in their pristine image, yet beneath the surface, tensions simmer among those who find that the price of conformity is too high. At the heart of this system is Karen Miller, known to everyone as HOA Karen. In her early 50s, Karen is a force of nature, armed with a clipboard, an ever-ready smartphone, and a steely determination to enforce every regulation with zeal. She patrols the neighborhood like a self-appointed guardian of perfection. To her, minor deviations, from an overgrown hedge to a non-conforming vehicle, aren't just mistakes. They're offenses that must be corrected at any cost. Her uncompromising approach has won her both staunch supporters and bitter detractors throughout Cedarview. I, on the other hand, have always cherished my independence. I grew up here and eventually became the town sheriff, a position that requires me to protect the community, maintain order, and, at times, confront the very people who believe they should be in charge. My days are long, filled with patrols through our quiet streets and visits to local businesses, and my uniform is both a badge of honor and a reminder of the responsibilities I bear. My SUV, a rugged yet dependable vehicle, has served as my partner on countless shifts, carrying me through the sprawling neighborhoods and rural stretches alike. My home, located on the outskirts of Cedarview, sits on a modest lot that has always been a symbol of personal freedom. The property is a blend of the rural past and modern functionality, a place where I could run a low-key farm stand on weekends and store my gear without interference. Over the years, I've invested in maintaining everything meticulously, not for vanity's sake, but to keep order in a world that sometimes descends into chaos. But in Cedarview, not everyone believes in personal freedom. The HOA enforces strict guidelines designed to preserve a uniform aesthetic, often at the expense of individuality. While many residents comply out of fear of fines, there's an undercurrent of resentment among those who, like me, believe that creativity and personal expression should not be stifled. I have always maintained that true public safety and community spirit come from diversity and responsible independence. And, as the town sheriff, I stand by those beliefs, even when they put me at odds with the relentless perfectionism of people like Karen. The setting itself, with its blend of urban and rural influences, creates an intriguing backdrop for our struggle. The streets of Cedarview are lined with old oak trees and freshly painted mailboxes, while the outskirts where I live offer wide open spaces and a taste of freedom rarely found in more crowded communities. It is in this environment, the balance between rule and rebellion, that the impending confrontation looms large. And now, as I stand before my deflated SUV, the familiar figure of HOA, Karen, lurks in the recesses of my memory, a symbol of everything that is rigid, intrusive, and out of touch with the spirit of Cedarview. This event isn't just about a few flat tires. It's about a battle for the right to govern one's own property and the freedom to serve the community without being hounded by petty arbiters of conformity. Today, the scales are about to tip, and I intend to ensure that justice prevails. As the initial shock of discovering my deflated tires waned, I began piecing together the puzzle. I reviewed the security camera footage from the previous night, and, sure enough, found a figure maneuvering stealthily along my driveway. The figure wore an unmistakable uniform, a copy of the HOA insignia, and with careful precision, tampered with the valves near my SUV. My heart sank as I realized that this act wasn't accidental. It was a calculated move designed to sabotage my access to work on a day that mattered. I recalled the string of disputes with Karen over the years. There have been fines for unauthorized modifications to my property and complaints about everything from the placement of my farm stand to the brightness of my signage. I had tried to ignore them, believing that my work as a law enforcement officer and the need to serve the community transcended such petty squabbles. However, this was different. My SUV, a tool of my trade and a symbol of my service as the town sheriff, had been deliberately targeted. It was a personal affront, a bold message from Karen that I was not to be defied. Fury surged through me as I compiled the evidence. I saved every frame from the security footage, recorded detailed notes of the incident, and even contacted a few fellow officers who confirmed that nothing on my routine patrol that night indicated any cause for such interference. The digital timestamps all pointed back to a single source, Karen Miller. Every piece of evidence confirmed that her hand had been behind this sabotage, and it wasn't just a random act of vandalism. It was a deliberate attempt to undermine my authority. Determined to respond in kind, I formulated a plan to confront not only the act itself, but the system that allowed such abuse of power. In Cedarview, the HOA was revered by many for its strict adherence to regulations. But for those of us who valued personal freedom, these rules were little more than chains. Karen's actions were the final straw, a direct assault on my ability to do my job and live without fear of arbitrary interference. I decided that the time had come to send a message that no one was above the law, especially not someone who tried to take advantage of their power. I began by reaching out discreetly to trusted allies in the community, neighbors who had long complained about Karen's overzealous fines and intrusive behavior. They expressed their anger and frustration, recounting stories of similar instances where their property rights had been trampled upon. Their support reinforced my resolve. I posted snippets of the security footage on a local community forum, accompanied by a call to action. The hashtag Defend Our Driveways soon began trending on the neighborhood's social media pages, and digital petitions demanding accountability from the HOA board gathered hundreds of signatures in just a few hours. Yet, I knew that words and digital evidence might not be enough to finally end this chapter of petty harassment. I needed to take matters a step further, a measured act that would force the entire community to confront the injustice and compel the HOA board to act. I decided that I would host a town meeting to publicly address the incident, laying bare all the evidence and demanding not only an immediate investigation into Karen's actions, but also a thorough review of the HOA's policies regarding private property. This meeting, I knew, would serve as a turning point for the community, a chance to reject arbitrary fines and reassert our rights. In the midst of all this, rumors began circulating that Karen herself was planning to retaliate. Late-night phone calls among residents hinted that she might file a cascade of new fines against me for damaging community property, simply because I would be challenging her authority. The digital chatter grew louder, and the pressure on the HOA board mounted with every passing hour. I spent that night drafting my speech for the upcoming town meeting. Every word was carefully chosen to reflect not just my anger, but the collective frustration of all those who had ever been punished for expressing themselves freely. I rehearsed my lines by the dim glow of my desk lamp, my mind racing with visions of a community united against injustice. If Karen thought that deflating my tires would deflate my spirit, she was in for a rude awakening. The stage was set. My evidence was irrefutable, my supporters were growing by the minute, and the digital momentum was on my side. I knew that once the town meeting was announced, the community's response would be overwhelming. Karen's blatant attempt to assert dominance over my property would be the catalyst for a broader movement, one that demanded accountability, fairness, and respect for individual rights. The battle lines had been drawn, and I was ready to fight for the dignity not only of my service as sheriff, but for the freedom of every resident in Cedarview. In the days following the incident, the story of my deflated SUV tires spread like wildfire throughout Cedarview. Social media erupted with outrage and humor in equal measure. Hashtags like hashtag defend our driveways, hashtag sheriff strikes back, and hashtag no more Karen began trending within our community. Neighbors who had long been stifled by the HOA's arbitrary practices finally found their voices, and every shared video clip of the sabotage added momentum to the growing movement against unfair enforcement. Local news stations quickly picked up the story. Reporters arrived on the scene, capturing footage of the damaged SUV and interviewing stunned residents who recounted their own experiences with Karen's heavy-handed tactics. "It's outrageous," one local resident exclaimed on live television. "Who deflates someone's tires just for not attending a mandatory community event?" The narrative evolved rapidly, from a simple act of vandalism to a symbol of the systemic abuse of power that had plagued Cedarview for far too long. Inside the HOA board, tensions began to boil over. Emergency meetings were held behind closed doors, and whispered conversations among board members revealed a growing rift. Some still supported Karen's exacting standards, insisting that rules were essential to maintaining community order. Others, increasingly swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and public outcry, argued that Karen's actions were an abuse of power, a personal vendetta masquerading as civic duty. Leaked minutes from one such meeting showed one board member exclaiming, "If we continue to tolerate this kind of behavior, we risk alienating every resident who values their property rights." The internal divisions threatened to undermine the board's credibility altogether. I continued to reinforce my digital campaign. Every evening, I posted updated security footage that highlighted the precision of the sabotage and the unmistakable evidence pointing to Karen. Digital petitions demanding strict accountability from the HOA board surged in numbers, and online community forums buzzed with impassioned debate about what property rights truly meant. Support poured in from unlikely quarters, long silent residents, local business owners, and even a few sympathetic officials who had once been staunch supporters of the HOA's policies. Meanwhile, the threat of retaliation from Karen loomed large. Rumors spread that she was preparing to file a new wave of fines, targeting not just me, but anyone who dared question her authority. In hushed tones, residents speculated about the possibility of more intrusive measures, inspections at odd hours, arbitrary penalties for minor discrepancies, and even public shaming events. The mere thought of these potential actions sent shivers down the spines of those who had grown tired of living in fear of an overzealous enforcer. Determined to preempt further abuse, I began organizing a town hall meeting that would serve as the platform for all our grievances. I called on my allies, distributed flyers throughout Cedarview, and posted the details on every community board and social media page I could find. The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, the meeting was filled to capacity, with residents eager to reclaim control over their property and their lives. The campaign rallying cry became clear. Our community would no longer be silenced by the arbitrary power of a single individual. On the eve of the town hall, I reviewed my digital dossier one last time. The carefully archived security footage, the signed petitions, and the supportive messages from residents. Everything was in place, and the collective voice of Cedarview was ready to be heard. I knew that the meeting would be a pivotal moment, a chance to force the HOA board to confront the inherent absurdities in their policies and to champion the rights of every resident. As the morning of the town hall arrived, I could sense that the tension was reaching a boiling point. The community center was already buzzing with anticipation, and every shared post online reinforced the message: we stand together or we fall divided. The digital evidence had not only exposed Karen's wrongdoing, but had also sparked a movement that demanded that our voices be heard and that our property rights be respected above all else. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp morning in a packed boardroom at the Cedarview Community Center. The room was teeming with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and an assembly of determined residents, all gathered for the final public hearing that would decide the fate of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm yet unyielding presence, I took the stage as the town sheriff, a role I had embraced with pride, and one that demanded that I protect not just the law, but the rights of every resident in Cedarview. I stand before you not just as your sheriff, but as someone who believes in the right to live free from arbitrary interference. I began, my voice steady and resolute. Last night, I discovered that my SUV, my tool of service and a vital part of my duty, was deliberately sabotaged. Every piece of evidence points to one person, Karen Miller, who has for too long abused her power in the name of community order. But today we say enough is enough. I paused as a murmur of agreement swept through the room, each resident's face lit by determination. I laid out the digital dossier before the assembly. Security footage, time-stamped images of the deflated tires, and detailed logs from my patrol that confirmed there was no legitimate reason for this act of vandalism. In Cedarview, property rights are not negotiable. When someone takes it upon themselves to enforce personal vendettas over lawful, peaceful conduct, they threaten the very fabric of our community. My words resonated, and I could see the spark of resolve in the eyes of my fellow residents. A respected community advocate rose to speak next. Today, we stand united in defense of our freedoms, he declared, his voice rich with conviction. No one, not even someone masquerading as a guardian of community standards, has the right to violate the property of a law-abiding citizen, especially when that citizen is the town sheriff. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that our community will not yield to arbitrary authority. Thunderous applause echoed in the room. Following this, a senior official from the local Business Oversight Committee presented additional evidence, confirming that no legitimate reason existed for the deflation of the tires and that the actions were a clear violation of property rights. The Internal Affairs panel of the HOA had reviewed all evidence and unanimously recommended disciplinary measures against those responsible. The document was laid out for all to see, leaving no doubt that the abuse of power was real and had gone unchecked for far too long. Effective immediately, Councilwoman Renee Thompson announced, the HOA board will rescind all sanctions related to this incident, and we will launch a comprehensive review of our enforcement policies. Our community's integrity and the right of every resident to live freely is paramount. Today's decision is a resounding declaration that Cedarview will stand up against arbitrary rule enforcement and that no one will be allowed to trample on our rights. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point. In that charged moment, as every face in the boardroom reflected hope and determination, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community compelled the HOA board to take decisive action, a watershed moment that would forever redefine the relationship between residents and the overreaching enforcers of community rules. In the weeks that followed the final vote, Cedarview underwent a profound transformation. News of the rescinded fines, the sweeping reforms, and the decisive action taken by the community spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking deep conversations about property rights, community governance, and the importance of trust in those entrusted with our safety. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedarview" and "Community United Against Arbitrary Rule," celebrated the victory of our collective voice over personal vendetta. Hashtags like #PropertyRights, #StandWithTheSheriff, and #NoMoreKaren trended widely, cementing our resolve and inspiring neighbors to speak out against any future abuses of power. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences, discuss the new policies, and express hope for a more respectful and inclusive future. Neighbors, once silenced by fear of punitive fines, now celebrated their right to live and work without arbitrary interference. Our community is built on the principle that every voice matters, one resident declared passionately at a crowded meeting. The atmosphere was one of hope and renewal, a promise that Cedarview would always defend individual rights and creative expression. Within the reformed HOA board and local law enforcement, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, rolled out comprehensive training programs emphasizing ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and fair enforcement procedures. Regular audits and transparent disciplinary processes were established to ensure that every complaint was scrutinized objectively, protecting residents from the whims of personal bias. Our duty is to serve this community with integrity, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing the newfound commitment to justice. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized to further empower residents. Workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns centered on property rights and community participation were organized, giving each individual the tools to safeguard their freedoms. When we come together, our collective voice is unstoppable, a local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring even the most reticent neighbors to join the chorus of change. For me, the journey from confronting a personal act of sabotage to igniting a community-wide stand for justice was nothing short of transformative. My decision to expose the deliberate deflation of my SUV's tires and to assert my authority, as both a property owner and the town sheriff, had sparked a movement that resonated through every corner of Cedarview. The digital evidence that once captured a moment of vulnerability had become a rallying cry for freedom, a symbol of the fact that no one is above the law when a community unites in the pursuit of justice. Karen Miller, once the feared enforcer of the HOA's draconian rules, was now a cautionary tale, a reminder that unchecked arrogance and abuse of power would ultimately be brought to account by the resolute spirit of a community that values fairness over conformity. Her influence waned as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, serving as evidence of the need for a more balanced and respectful approach to enforcement. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedarview, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the fading light of a golden sunset. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Fair Governance" was unfurled between towering trees, and heartfelt speeches echoed promises of a vibrant future. Today, we celebrate our victory against arbitrary rule, Councilwoman Thompson proclaimed, her voice strong with conviction. The standing ovation that followed affirmed our collective resolve to protect our rights and ensure that our community would never again be subject to petty, personal vendettas. As each new day dawned over Cedarview, the legacy of our hard-fought battle endured, a beacon of hope, resilience, and the enduring belief that no matter how high the walls of bureaucracy may rise, the spirit of a united community will always triumph. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedarview, truth, justice, and individual freedom would forever prevail. In the end, what began as an act of sabotage became a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedarview would always be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual property and professional duty shone as brightly as the morning light.